thing.
Oh, yeah. All right. Well, thank you guys for being here. I've been a little under the weather like some of you, so if I quit talking halfway, it's because I can't talk anymore.
I have Ricola if you need it.
What's that?
Oh, soothe your throat. Makes you not act weird.
Well, I doubt it makes me not act weird, but that's all right. Thank you, though. Let's go to Exodus, the 20th chapter, where we left off last week, and then we'll try to fly through some of the stuff here. Who would like to read Exodus chapter 20, verse 1 and verse 2? Oh, thanks.
Exodus 20.
Oh, here you go. All right, how about you read the first verse and you read the second verse? Oh, that's cool. All right.
And God spoke all these words, saying,
I am the Lord your God who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery.
Excellent. These two verses introduce what?
10 Commandments.
The Ten Commandments, yeah. The Ten Commandments. And we mentioned last week, sometimes, what's one of the technical terms they use to refer to the Ten Commandments? Remember this?
Deca something.
Yeah, Deca something. It's the Decalogue.
Oh, the Decalogue.
Sometimes they refer to it as the Decalogue. When you're reading a commentary, it'll just say the Decalogue. And you'll be like, what? You know, part of being a good commentator is being able to use fancy words, I think. It's one of the things. All right, but let's try to use this as a springboard to get into the commands, okay? I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. And before that, the first verse says what? And God spoke all these words?
Yes.
Big long verse like that. What does that tell us? If we were just looking at that, what does that tell us about God? Can we learn anything from God just based on these two verses right here?
He does things on purpose.
On purpose? Okay. What do you mean by that?
Like, he freed them from Egypt for a reason. And he wants them to not forget the reason that he freed them.
Okay. I like that. God has reasons. Okay. Anything else you can learn?
He saves.
What's that?
He saves.
Okay, yeah.
Brought them out of the land of Egypt.
God saves at times. That's very good. What else do we learn about God?
He's the big guy. I'm the Lord your God.
Now that's a good point. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. I'm going to say you're implying power there when you say
Yes.
that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, God is powerful. Yeah, definitely. Anything else we learn about God?
And he loves them because he did that for them.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. He chose to save them and is powerful. Technically at this point, although we can imply that, I guess we can't 100% know that it's out of love that he did it. What if it was out of some other motivation that he chose to save them? But I think you're right. I do. But what else can we learn from this verse, these two verses? Well, how about from verse 1? And God spoke all these words.
Importance?
Yeah, he
Okay,
spoke them.
there's some importance. Yeah.
He speaks.
Yeah. What about, let's go with the easy one. God is real. That's a pretty obvious one, right? But still, it's pretty important. Has huge ramifications. God communicates. And then I could say, with man, but specifically, who's he communicating with here?
Moses.
Yeah, not just Moses. Who else? Because Moses is going to bring this message to who? In other words, God said these words not just for Moses to privately know,
Oh,
Israel.
Yeah, Israel. Through Moses, you're right.
were they Israel then?
Yes, Israel is another name for Jacob. They were the descendants of Jacob.
Ah,
at that
okay.
time. Yeah. So, yeah, God communicates. Now, what's the other interesting thing? How does God communicate? We know he communicates, but what's a way that he communicates that we know here?
He
From the
spoke.
very first verse. What?
Spoke.
Spoke.
And talks.
God communicates verbally at times. Okay. And obviously what you guys said, I think you kind of implied this, but because he's introducing himself and what is about to be said, that implies that there is obedience, there's respect due because of the words that he's about to say. So, how would I write that? Anyway, I think the idea is the 10 Commandments. Must be respected. Why must these words be respected?
They're spoken by the Lord your God.
Yes, because of the one who's saying them, right? Because of the one who's saying them. Now, in one of the books I've read, or I've been reading by Doc Smith, he has these little statistics that he pulls out occasionally, and so I thought this one was kind of interesting. It says that only 13% of Americans still believe in all 10 commandments. 9 out of 10 lie regularly. Nearly 1/3 has an affair. 1/5 of children lose their virginity by age 13. For $10 million, 7% would kill a stranger. Those were stats from 1991. I guess the book called The Day America Told the Truth. $10 million. Oh, as long as it's a random stranger, I won't get caught. I'll kill somebody. Wow, that is quite. I mean, only 7%, right? But that's still, that's 1 out of every 11. 1 out of every 12 people.
That's
Yeah.
mental illness.
Pretty scary. Pretty scary. So, what we have here in the very first verse is we have not just God. What does it say? I am the what?
Lord your God.
Lord, your God. So what is that? Yahweh Elohim. Why would he use 2 different words to describe himself? Do you think they didn't know who he was, that he had to use 2 words? I am the Lord God.
Emphasis.
It is emphasis, but what's in a name? Is there anything, all right, if someone came up to, I was actually watching a movie not that long ago, set back in the Civil War times or whatever. So if someone came up to you and said, hey ma'am, thank you so much for what you did for me, that's great. And then somebody else said, oh master, please forgive me. Does that tell you anything about this person? Does calling somebody ma'am mean the same thing to you as calling somebody master?
No.
We might be addressing the same person, but who would call a person master?
A slave.
Someone who's probably a slave, right? So that tells you something different about the person, right? Well, God, what do we know about the word Elohim?
Can you write that down?
Yeah, I can try. I won't draw it properly, but Elohim.
Oh, okay.
And what does this mean?
Multiple.
It means plural. The name El is the prefix for God, but it's a plural form of the word, so it literally means God or gods. It is a plurality, even though it refers to one God, which is mind-blowing in the very beginning. When was this used? The term Elohim. What does it remind you of? Take a wild guess. When was the first time Elohim was used?
The first verse.
The first verse of the Bible, and what does Elohim do there?
The beginning.
Yeah, think the first. Yeah, he created what?
The universe.
Yeah, the heavens and the earth. That is a throwback to the Creator, the one who is all powerful, who did all this stuff. I'd say he's got a pretty good resume for authority right there. I am Elohim. I'm the one that created the entire world. Okay? But I'm not just Elohim, I am Yahweh Elohim. Yahweh is not the exact same thing as Elohim. Yahweh is a singular name. When God uses the term Yahweh, it's usually in a more personal context. You see the difference? Sometimes it's about, it's because I am God of everything, I am the creator. But there's other times where it's about, this is because I'm Yahweh, I'm different, I'm perfect, appealing to the very character of that one individual, that one God, the creator. So both these terms help fill in the idea of who God is. He doesn't want them to just think of him as being powerful only. I think he wants them to think of himself as being powerful and personal, kind of together. I am the Lord your God. Now, we already touched on this, but who was the mediator of this covenant? Moses was. Can somebody read the first 3 verses of Hebrews chapter 3? As a matter of fact, while somebody looks that up, let me throw out some verses here. This might help us along a little bit. Let's see. Somebody
3.
look up, Hebrews 3, the first 3 verses. Can somebody take Hosea 2:2?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Can somebody else look up Deuteronomy 14, verse 2?
I will.
Wonderful, thank you.
Hosea what?
2:2.
Okay.
What version do you want?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Oh, okay.
Whatever
I'll
you
use the
would
King
like to
James.
use. Well, maybe it doesn't matter.
No, I'm not going to use it.
And God none. Alright, just gloss over that. And then later on, I think I'm going to want Genesis 17 around verse 10 through 14. Somebody look that one up. Thanks. And then the last one I think will be Colossians 2, verse 11 and 12.
I got you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Need any of those again?
Huh?
Need any of those verses again?
Genesis 17.
Genesis 17.
10 through 14.
Yes, thank you. That is correct. Okay. What does Exodus say? What does Hebrews say in reference to Moses?
Therefore, holy brothers, you who share in a heavenly calling, consider Jesus the apostle and high priest of our confession, who was faithful to him who appointed him, just as Moses, who was faithful in all God's house. For Jesus had been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, as much more glory as a builder of a house is honored than the house itself.
Okay. So, Moses is the mediator of the covenant. But Moses wasn't just any ordinary prophet. What that basically says, who is the prophet that he's talking about here in Hebrews, the 3rd chapter? He's talking about Moses at the end, but in the beginning, who's he talking about? No, he's talking about Jesus himself. Yeah. Jesus as a perfect prophet. And then he takes Jesus as a perfect prophet and he likens him back to Moses. Why pick Moses when there's Elijah, Elisha, many other prophets that he could have picked? I think something's implied here. There's something special with Moses. One of the things that Jesus was fulfilling in prophecy was when Moses even says there's going to be a prophet that arises like unto me, and you need to listen to what he says. Jesus is that prophet like unto Moses. Well, then you're kind of asking yourself the question, okay, Moses was an awesome guy, but so were Elijah and Elisha and some of the others, the E-team, obviously, they were great guys. So why would he single out Moses. What was unique about Moses? Let me ask you guys right now, what is unique about Moses among all the other prophets?
The first.
Was it? Wait, no.
Melchizedek.
Oh, Melchizedek. Well, he was.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I don't think Moses was the first. I think there were some others that spoke for God. But you stumped me there for a second. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm losing my mind. But what else is unique about Moses?
I got face to face.
Yeah, remember when God even says later on, you know, I communicate to my prophets through visions, through signs, but not Moses. It's clear, it's direct, it's face to face. Yeah. And then Hebrews points out the other difference. Moses was a mediator. What is a mediator?
Someone who handles disputes and is the go-between, the middle person.
Yes, the go-between. That's a good way to put it. Someone who helps bring peace through this conflict. The mediator of the covenant or of the promise. Well, what is the promise? Well, in this case, it was God with his people Israel. And in the new covenant, it is Jesus. It is God through Jesus with his people, spiritual Israel, all of us. So Moses was special in the sense that he was the mediator of this covenant. Now, where was the law given? Let's talk about locations. You know what they say? Location.
Mount Sinai.
Yes. The law was given at Mount Sinai. And the law was also given at Kadesh. The law was also given once more in the plains of Moab. You remember why the law was given in the plains of Moab? I'll give you a hint, it was right before Moses died.
The next generation was.
Yes, the next generation. They had been traveling in the plains and they were not far off to where they could see the promised land coming. So the law was actually, even though we talk about it being given at Mount Sinai, that was kind of the main place that everyone, thinks of. But there were other places where he also reiterated, and in some cases said some things that were not identical to the law that you saw at Mount Sinai. Kind of explain things a little bit better, stuff like that. So that's interesting. You know what? Some of this is kind of dry stuff, but it's important, I think, so I'll put it in there. They have, how people like to categorize things? Well, it is helpful sometimes. They talk about 4 great collections of law. 4 great collections of law. And what they have is the first one that consists of 10, the Decalogue. So that's, where is that found in the Bible? Exodus chapter 20, yes, and? Deuteronomy chapter, give me 5. Thank you.
5.
Deuteronomy chapter 5, yeah. So, Exodus 20, Deuteronomy 5. Man, I'm already bad enough at drawing, but okay, so that's the Decalogue. But then there's also the Covenant Code, is what some call it. The Covenant Code can be found in Exodus after chapter 20 all the way through chapter 23. So I'll just put that down. Exodus 20 after that through 23. And it contains a mixture of teaching, and it also has some procedural law as well. So that is kind of some people call that the Covenant Code. It teaches you about this covenant, and then it gives you this is the way you do things, this is some procedure. Then we have Holiness Code. Take a guess what this is about.
Worship in the temple and the tabernacle.
Yeah, it's about stuff that makes you what? Holy. Yeah, what does the word holy mean? Set apart, separate. And this is a very colorful. This is a very good picture because they were literally a nation that should look very different from all the other nations around. So from a worldly picture, God can look down and he can point to Israel, that people, and say they are holy people. They do things differently, they act differently, they behave differently because they're trying to be like me. And this you find in Leviticus 18 through 20 is a part where you see, and there are other examples of these, I'm just giving you some quick examples of this. Leviticus 18 through 20. What gives this away is when God says, same thing he said in the beginning, I am the Lord your God. And a lot of times he'll even say, I am the Lord, or I, the Lord your God, am holy. Or be holy as I am holy. Have you ever been reading through the law and you feel like you're reading that phrase over and over and over again? God said, don't do this, you shall not do this or this, for I, the Lord your God, am holy. You know, I am the Lord, I am the Lord, I am the Lord. It's God over and over and over again keeps saying that, and the idea is you are trying to be like me. You are trying to model my character. And so that's why he will constantly appeal to holiness by saying, I am the Lord. AKA, I'm not like everyone else. I'm different. Set apart. Does that make sense? Okay.
Did Jesus take that and just shorten it to I am?
To I am. Wait, say that again? Did Jesus shorten it to I am? When are you referring to?
Never mind.
Okay. But, you know, Jesus picked up on the idea when he said...
No, I'm way off base, so don't even waste your breath.
All right. But you know what? Jesus did say, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. And it kind of appeals to the same sort of thing. And then we have the Deuteronomy... That's fun to say. Deuteronomic code, which that is, I guess you want me to spell that, don't you? I'm going to have to look that up.
Deuteronomic.
Yes, thank you. Code, and that is the one that you find in Deuteronomy chapters 12 through 25, and it is what was given here in the plains of Moab. So they give that kind of a separate name. So the reason why I want you guys to hear this is not necessarily because I think it's a big deal to remember, but if you're ever reading on this subject, you might come across terms like this, and at least you'll have an idea of what he's getting at. So, another data bank is what Doc Smith calls these. He says, whatever happened to right and wrong? One of the ways modern man attempts to destigmatize moral evil is to give it more positive names. Thus, adultery has become having an affair, lying is disinformation, fornication is a relationship, a drunken brawl is partying, lust is adult entertainment, profanity is adult language, homosexuality is alternative lifestyle, immorality is sexual freedom, stealing is redistribution of wealth, perjury is selective memory, bribery is monetary influence, etc., etc. So I don't know what book you pulled that from.
That's
but,
cute.
You know, I remember, who's that guy that preached, I'm drawing a blank. Who's that guy that preached for the biggest church in America?
Billy Graham?
Bob Russell. Thank you for helping me. Bob Russell wrote down one of those things. I remember at the little bookshop that they had there, he said, you know, Lord, forgive us our trespasses. But then he wrote down a whole list like that, you know, we've called, you know, all these different things, you know, adultery, having an affair, whatever. Yeah, and it is, when you stop and think about it, it is true. It's one of the ways that you try to accept new things is you got to give it a label. Oh yeah, what about murdering of unborn children? Oh, that's an abortion, or even better, a choice. That is just a choice. You know, it sounds so much better to say it that way than it does to say what's actually going on. It is a choice. Let's not talk about the actions of that choice. Just say, oh, we'll call that choice or not choice.
I think they're dumbing it down.
Well, it's interesting, though. It's one of the ways that we accept things like this. Jewish tradition regarded Exodus chapter 20, verse 2, that I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, as the first of the Ten Commandments. Do you hear that? They regarded verse 2 as the first of the 10 commandments.
Who did?
Jewish tradition. So, it makes you wonder, well, wait a minute. How do you end up with 10 commandments? Wouldn't you have 11 commandments then? Because you're adding this to the first one? So that's interesting. We'll get to that in a bit. I think the best way to understand this is not part of the 10 commandments per se. It was like a stamp of approval. You know what I mean? It was God setting it up, saying, this is me, guys. Listen. All right. Excuse me.
You
Let's
need one
road.
of my Ritalin.
Got cough drops. You want something?
Yay.
Right there.
Your God. What does your imply? I am the Lord, your God.
Personal. One and only.
Okay. Personal, another word for personal might be relationship. So, can you think of any ways in the Bible, are you having fun looking at my eyes while wearing stuff? Sorry. Can you think of any ways in the Bible where God pictured Israel's relationship? For instance,
I always think of Hosea.
okay, why?
Not
Why?
a good one, but it's
That's fine. No, that's fine. What's
they're
the example?
pictured as a prostitute, so that's encouraging.
Well, I'll say that the nicer way.
Yeah.
What? Somebody read Hosea 2:2. Did I give that to somebody?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Rebuke your mother. Rebuke her. For she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her remove the adulterous look from her face, and the unfaithfulness from between her breasts.
That is, you said prostitute, but Gomer was actually Hosea's wife. Really? Yeah, I know.
She was ugly though, wasn't she?
I don't know.
That's what I heard.
Oh, that's funny. So they're pictured as a husband-wife relationship. Also, God is father, and then daughter relationship. There's the father-son relationship. Deuteronomy 14:2.
For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. Out of all these peoples on the face of the earth, the Lord has chosen you to be his treasured possession.
So what relationship is that?
Ooh. A group relationship?
They are his possession, property.
Property.
Okay. Two other ones. Can you think of any other examples of relationships that God describes himself as?
Slave and free?
Yes. Good job. I'll just put master, servant. Master to servant, very true. As a matter of fact, he still refers to us that way, which is funny. We're free to choose who we're going to serve. And then one other one, it is not Elvis, but
Bride?
king and then the subjects. That kind of relationship too. God has used a lot of analogies to picture his relationship. Now there again, God could have just used one, but the fact that he used all of these helps us learn more about who God is. So, who is God? Well, that's not an easy question to answer, obviously. But he's letting us know a little bit of his nature by saying, I'm king. I'm the master, and I own you. But I'm also your father. I'm your husband. You're like, what? What? How do those things go together? Well, in some ways for us, they don't really go together because we have a hard time picturing If, well, think of it this way. If somebody was like a dictator or a king, you know, of a group of people, you would feel like, oh, you know, what would your relationship be to them? It might not be the best, but what if you were married to them? Would you see them differently than you would just any other person in the kingdom? I think so. Or if you were a son or a daughter, I think you would see things differently too. A lot of times you hear this fits in perfectly with the debate about, you know, should we dress up for church or not, you know, on Sundays. Because a lot of times, you know, we're going into the presence of the king, you know, and then other people will say, yeah, but he's also our father. So, in other words, both sides are just picking out the one piece of information that they want to use and say, oh no, he's my dad, so I don't care, I'm not intimidated. But he's the king, you need to respect him and have reverence. And anyway, so the point is, God is all of this stuff. So our understanding of God cannot lock him down to one or the other. It needs to be broad enough to encompass, wow, God is somehow all of this wrapped into one. And I need to understand him more to figure out, okay, what areas of life, what situations is he more like the husband and father? In what situations might I think of him better as a king or a master? And is able to serve him better because I am processing it properly, you know, if that makes sense. Now, when God says that he brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, you know how many times God reminded them of that?
423.
Good guess, but no. He reminded them that 125 times in the Bible.
Whoa.
125 times in the Bible there is a reminder to God bringing them out of slavery. Now, that is actually pretty fascinating, and I bet some of you have heard this before. When did God give the law? At Mount Sinai. We'll go with that one first. Mount Sinai comes when? Before or after the plagues in the Red Sea?
After.
So God displayed his power at the Red Sea, right?
Mm-hmm.
Separated them, pulled them out of slavery, and then he gave them the law. In other words, God saved them first through his power, and then after they were delivered from slavery, he said, now here's the way I want you to live. Does that sound anything, you know, potentially like the new covenant that we know of today? Anything at all? You know, a lot of times we think, you know, people fall into the trap of, oh, I'm just not good enough. You know, I want to be into heaven, but I'm never going to make it there because I just don't live a good enough life. And we always have to explain to people, no, it's not about that. But then later on you have to explain, but it is still important to be a good person because that's what God wants. Well, what is that? God saves. And then because he saves you, hopefully you will want to respond to his, you know, out of love, you'll want to respond to his commands, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the same thing is done with Israel. And that's pretty impressive to think about. I can't believe I never thought of it, you know, before recently, but it's like God saved them first. And then after that, he said, now that I've already delivered you, this is what I would like you to do.
Wasn't he bribing them too?
What's that?
It'd be the same thing as bribing somebody. If you do this and that, or look what I'm going to give you, or look what I did for you, and now you got to pay me. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you know what? You also have a good point that even after that, God did say, hey, if you do these things, you're going to live long in this land. You know, the fifth commandment even talks about that. You're going to honor your father and mother. Why? What will that do for you?
Give you many years in life.
Yeah, you'll live a long time. It's interesting. It doesn't say that about the Sabbath or anything else. Obey mom and dad and you'll live a long time. It'd be interesting if someone did a study on that. I'd rather do that. That'd be challenging. It also, I think, God saying that gives him a little bit of authority ahead of time, saying, hey, I'm the one that brought you out of this. So since I saved you, can I ask a favor? And don't you feel like, don't you hate it when people come up to you and they ask you like, hey, man, I just need a favor. Can I ask a favor of you? Just, you know, and you're like, I know I'm supposed to be a Christian, but I'm sick of this guy asking for favors or whatever. But if somebody just saved your life, and then they say, hey, can I ask a favor of you? Do you have a problem with that then? I hope not. I hope you don't, because at that point, I mean, you'd be dead if it weren't for them, so you should be willing to do whatever. So God's kind of saying the same thing here. You know, I already saved you. And it gives me some sort of right to say, hey, since you would be dead without me, please do this for me. You know, give some authority, I'd say. Why 10, not 9, not 11? Why 10 commandments?
It's the number for completeness.
Yes, it is the number for completeness. Do you know one of the ways that that number for completeness was kind of arrived at least a lot of the early teachers and stuff would arrive at that?
The 10 plagues.
Well, there's 10 plagues. That's an example of a complete amount of destruction. And I think you'll find a lot of other examples, but if you go back to the very beginning, God created the world in Genesis what? 1 and
0.
2.
Oh.
Creation was both chapter 1 and chapter 2, right? God created the world with 10 commands. He used 10 separate commands to speak the entire creation into existence. And so from that idea, you know, from there it's like, wow, in 10 commands God made everything. And the idea of completeness seemed to just follow from that. 10 plagues, 10 commandments. The number 10 does mean complete and is often used that way. But that's impressive. 10 commands to speak the entire world into existence. Even if I had God's power, it would take me more than 10 commands, I think. I think I would have a few more that I'd have to come up with. Are there ever any hints in the Bible about the 10 commandments before the 10 commandments were around? Can you think of any allusion at all to one of God's commands before they were actually given in Exodus chapter 20? Well, there are. One of the ones that comes to my mind was with Jacob. When Jacob was leaving and he was about to come to Bethel, the house of God, right? And he was going to be wrestling with God and all this other stuff, see the ladder and all that. In the verse just before that, right before it, it says he told them to put away all their idols, all their household gods. He said that to all his servants, his wives, put away all these idols. Why? Because we're about to meet in a place with God. Well, where did he learn that idea? You know what I mean? I think he's right, but the 10 Commandments hadn't been given yet. But yet somehow Jacob was smart enough to realize, hey, this is the presence of God, and this God does not like the presence of idols, of these images, so we need to put them away. So that's just one example, and there are other little hints or allusions. When you go back and do your reading again, you ought to look for those. See if you can find anything in the 10 Commandments that were before the 10 Commandments.
What about when Moses was given the 10 Commandments and before he saw God, didn't God tell him to take your shoes off because you're standing on holy ground or something?
Okay.
Would that be like an example, or?
That would be an example of a command, but one of the things I was thinking of is like, idols is the second commandment, and yet they hadn't been given the commandments yet, so how did Jacob even know about that? But he did. He did. And there are some other ones too, you know. From Jacob, Israel should have known even before the 10 Commandments, you don't have idols. That's, you know, their forefather, the one they're named after, should have taught them that. And there are other examples of that. The other thing that's interesting is if you look at all the, Dr. Smith says, if you look at all the ancient Near Eastern literature, the 10 Commandments are unique. You just don't find anything like them. They're really one of the best summaries of the law. They are probably the best summary of the law you can think of. But they are not the only summary of the law. I'm going to give you some verses. Psalm 15. Psalm 15 gives 11 principles that are also perhaps a good summary of God's law. Isaiah 33, verse 15. Around Isaiah 33:15, there are 6 commands given that are also a kind of a summary of God's law. That's Isaiah 33:15. In Micah 6:8, 3 commands are given. That's Micah 6:8. So, and then on Isaiah 56, we have the first verse, Isaiah 56:1, we have the 2 commandments. 2 commands are given. And then a couple of places that only have 1 command are Habakkuk 2:4 and Leviticus 19:2. But those are probably, I haven't looked them up, but those are probably the love reference, which does summarize the entire law. Jesus said so. So it's interesting, there are other examples of a summary of God's law throughout the Old Testament. But the 10 Commandments is considered the best, the most concise, and yet detailed of the bunch. So, all right, there's a problem of numbering. Please do take a look at this. Take a look at this and then try to figure out where we are on this top chart here.
Where we are personally in our life, or as a country, or as a world?
All of the above.
Oh,
All of the above. I'm going to come up with 10 commandments. Look at the Jews, the Jewish tradition. What's commandment number 1? I am the Lord your God. Okay. We don't really, a lot of other, Catholics and Protestants haven't held that as a command, so how are they going to arrive at 10? Commandment 2. Oh wait, well, they count that as 1. No other gods before me would be 2 to them. And no images. See what they did there? They combined those 2. Which kind of, on the surface, it kind of seems to make sense, right? Isn't it kind of a redundancy? Isn't it a duplicate for God to say, you will have no other gods besides me, and you will have no graven images? Don't those both kind of mean the same thing? Or is there a substantial difference between the two?
Big
What would the
difference.
difference be?
Well, an image would be like like the golden calf, right? Would that be
Sure.
an image, whereas gods would just be the idea of another god? Is that the difference there?
Yeah. But most people, when they worshipped idols, like we'll take Baal worship or Molech, they were worshiping another god, and it just happened to be in an image.
Okay.
So couldn't you save yourself the time by, dropping the image command and just saying no other gods, and everyone should figure out, only God, none of these statues?
what about the Greek gods and the Roman gods and the Indians? They considered animals gods, and the East Indians, that's the West Indians.
Sure.
East Indians
But-
consider cows.
But those are other gods, right? They're not
Right.
the God. And so what I'm saying is, why have a command for no graven images if you already have a command that says no other gods?
Because people say that an image is to represent God.
Yes, people will do that. What is the difference there?
God is not an image. Oh,
Yeah, you're right. But what is the difference between idol worship or, worshiping another god in a statue or idol or whatever, and what you're talking about?
one represents false God.
Mhm.
They'll say that this image represents the true God.
Yes. In other words, we might take some beautiful image and we say this represents not a false god, God. It represents the one true God. And this is just a visual aid that's going to help us in our worship of God. In other words, saying, hey, let's worship God through this image instead of, you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I would just, is that whenever Aaron fastened the golden calf, wasn't it that they were worshiping the true God, but through this
I think so.
representation?
I think so. And then an example like that, and there are others, I believe, where he says, Israel, these are, and when I believe the other golden calf incident too that Jeroboam set up, he said, behold your gods, your God who brought you out of Egypt. Or are they stupid? Are they stupid to, they should be able to look at a golden cow and realize that's not God. Wait a minute, that's just a piece of gold. I saw the guy who made that. I don't think they're that dumb. I think in reality, when he said, here is your God that rescued you from Egypt, what he's saying is when you look at this statue, think of God. Direct your thoughts toward God. Not that this statue actually is God, it is just a representation or a likeness of. And God is saying, no, I don't want you to worship me, anyone besides me, obviously. But at the same time, I don't want you to worship through a representation of me. Now, is that an issue or a problem that Christians could run into today?
Yeah, about the cross, then yeah.
Yeah. Now, I don't think it's necessarily bad to, you know what, if I write the word Christian on the board, or I write the word God on the board, I have just used a visual representation to trigger your thinking to God. So if I write God is awesome, does that mean I'm breaking the second commandment? Because that is a visual image that we're using to direct our thoughts towards God. No, I don't think he's talking about visual aids or being wrong. But when you try to take something and use it to truly represent God and worship him through that thing, in other words, raise it up to a higher level and say this somehow is a picture of who God is and we're using it to serve him, then you have issues. So, when I was, all those years ago when I was in youth ministry, I had a kid from the Catholic Church show up. And I'm like, oh, a Catholic kid. They exist. Interesting, you know. Because what this kid was he was one of the leaders in Catholic youth group. And that shocked me because I'm like, whoa, I didn't know Catholics actually had a youth group that wasn't like forced or, you know, whatever. Because my other friends had to pay to go to Sunday school. Like, I'm like, that's genius. Why didn't I think of that? So, but this kid, yeah, he said, no, I'm one of the leaders. The church had kind of honed in on him, and he was one of the team leaders there. And so, and I think he brought it up on his own. I don't think I brought it up. But he said, you know, a lot of people get really upset when they talk about, you know, we talk about praying to Mary or whatever, you know, and saints. But what I always try to explain to them is we're not worshiping, you know, this is not breaking the second commandment. We're not worshiping an idol. All that we're saying is that Mary is just a way to God. We use Mary as sort of like a person to go between, a mediator, someone we can look to, and she helps us get to God. But we're not breaking the commandments. Was he right about that? No. The funny thing was he didn't realize it at all, but I'm like, what you just described to me is exactly how you break the second commandment. A lot of people can be confused, just like I think some of the Jews might have been confused on this, and think that no other gods and no images are one and the same thing, but they're not. One is worshiping another god. The other is worshiping the true God, but using an image or a representation or a Mary or a saint or whatever as an access or as an image of who he is, a way to God. You don't worship God through them. Christ is the only intercessor we have. You know, he is the one. So, but anyway, yeah, just kind of funny. I guess Catholic Church not here. So, no images. Now, isn't it interesting, the Catholic and Lutherans on no other gods and no graven images, they're counting it together too. We're kind of the only weird ones out here, and the Protestant side, which would be kind of the side that we're on probably closest to. So then we say, you know, don't take God's name in vain. Well, the Jews are up to 3 there, but the Catholic and the Lutheran side, they're up to 2. And then we're at commandment 3. Weird, right? Confusing, huh? Remember the Sabbath day, 4th commandment. But Catholics and Lutherans will say, oh no, it's 3rd commandment. Honor your parents, 5th commandment. And you can pretty well see all the way up to the end, the Jews and the Protestants are going to have kind of the same view. But what about the Catholics and the Lutherans? They lump together no gods and no images. So how do they separate that? Well, you get down to the bottom, and what have they done? They've taken verse 17, and they say there are 2 commands there. 2. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, and you shall not covet your neighbor's possessions. But you know, it goes into more detail, ox or donkey or anything that belongs to your neighbor. So that's how they separate it. They say the coveting is 2 different types of coveting, you know, a person and a possession. But I think the idea of covet is probably good enough. And you guys know what coveting is, right? Wanting other people's stuff.
Lusty.
It's a good thing Americans don't struggle with that.
No, you don't.
All right. Now on the bottom there, ooh boy.
You got time to discuss this big subject?
I don't want to cut this one short. Sorry, I shouldn't have said that.
Very funny.
But this Yeah, I'll erase that. All right, we're almost to the sign of the covenant. But before that, how many tablets do we have? I keep giving you the answer with my hand, and my hand doesn't even mean it. How many tablets of stone did God give?
3. Oh, 2.
Ah, 2. Why 2? Why not just 1?
Because you could only carry 2.
2 arms, yeah. Why did he not give you 3 hands, Seth? Huh? So a lot of times, have you thought sort of like I do that? How many are on tablet 1? And how many are on tablet 2? It's as though there's the Android tablet and the Apple iPad tablet, and half the commands made it here, and the other half made it here. And then what? 1 through 3, 1 through 4 on this side, 5 through 10. Is that
Yeah.
what you guys think? We have a vote.
I say 1 through 4, 6 through 10.
Really? Does anyone want to disagree with that?
5.
I mean, the last ones are pretty quick. Oh, we skipped 5.
1 through 4, 5 to 10.
That's just parents. Who cares?
Yeah.
Father, mother. All right. Well, you know what? And you watch the movies and stuff, and you're like, it's interesting the way they do it. I think they try to not have an answer to this. But one of the things that's cool, and it comes from archaeology, a lot of times when a king, usually a great king, who was way superior to like a vassal nation or whatever, a smaller one, when he had some sort of a treaty or something that had to be followed, he would take it and he would write the stipulations of the commands for the treaty, and he would put it on 2 tablets, 2 copies. Both were identical. Why do you have 2? Well, it's official. We have 1 for both parties here. We have 1 that I have, 1 that you have. Both have a copy of all the commands that are to be followed, and so it's as though we both have the same papers, we've signed them, everything is good. That is an interesting thought, I think. And I think there might be something to that. Maybe God was appealing to something that they're already familiar with among ancient kings, that he had 2 copies of the exact same, of all 10, on each tablet. And the idea was, here's the contract. 2 parties, 2 tablets. Does that make sense? So it's an interesting thought, and I think there's something to that.
What did they write the other 603?
13?
Yeah, what did they
Oh,
write
that
those
would've-
on?
Well, that would have been taught orally for a long time, but then probably on papyrus
Papyrus,
and
yeah,
other
okay.
things like that is my guess. Or anything else. They would write it on their houses. Bible even says so.
Really?
Write it on their door frames, on their house.
Oh, how
I think they
cool.
were trying. I think the Bible's trying to be metaphorical there, but the point is, don't ever forget it. Talk about it, write it. Don't let it be forgotten. Okay. Why is the Bible so negative? That's a good thought. Have you ever noticed, like, the 10 Commandments are pretty negative? Aren't they? No other gods, no images. No, I mean, almost all of them except, there's a Sabbath, there's honor your father and mother, so there's 2. Are there any others that are not a negative? Don't do this. No. What? You know what I'm saying, though, as far as the negativity of why say, instead of saying, be like this kind of person, why is he saying just no, 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 no?
I don't understand that word.
Because they're children.
You know what? One of the things, it's funny because in our culture we don't like to be told no, and a lot of times we think, why can't you say things more positively or whatever, find a better way to say it. But in saying no, God does us a big favor. He shortens everything. When God says, no, don't do that, that's something that you can say. That is a command given in probably about the fewest possible words. No, don't do that. Don't do this. Don't do this. Don't do this. He's saving us a lot of time, and I, for one, really appreciate that. But not only did it make it shorter, not only did it make it to the point, it also makes it less restrictive, if you think about it. Because if God says, here's the ideal, be this, then there's everything else that you're like, oh, but I can't do this, this, or this. I just have to be this little mold here. But if God says, don't do that, it's as though he singles out one thing and everything else is in the realm of freedom. You see what I mean? But this one thing, don't do that. It's less restrictive to give a negative. It's more specific, it's less restrictive, it's shorter.
Well, it doesn't allow personalization either.
True.
I mean, he doesn't want you.
Can't personalize it as
Yeah.
much, it's just straight to the point. But the other cool thing, and something that I was taught that I wish I would have thought of when I was younger, But the idea was, when God says, don't do this, he has a reason for saying, don't do that. And the way the Jews understood this, I believe, and I think the way we should understand this too, is when God says no to something, he is implying that the opposite of that thing is a yes. Now that sounds like a no-brainer, right? But think of it this way. God says, don't commit adultery, right? Adultery is having sex with a married person, right? That you're not married to. Now, if God says don't do that, what is the positive thing he's trying to accomplish here?
Get married.
He's trying to lift up marriage, isn't he? So if you wanted to apply the opposite of this negative command, right, to, not commit adultery, you want to do the opposite of that, what do you think God would want you to do? Anything you can to what? Help out marriage. You understand? Mm-hmm. That's the opposite of don't commit adultery. And God's implying he wants us to do the opposite. So we as people would teach people about how wonderful marriage is. We would model how marriage is supposed to be and how we keep the covenant and all that. And you know what I mean? That's what God's looking for. If God says do not murder, that is, take somebody's life when you have no authority to do so, what is the opposite of that? What is the opposite of murder?
Giving life.
Giving life.
Having children.
So in other words, not only are we not supposed to murder, but in order to please God, what does God want us to do? He wants us to be the kind of people that are supportive of life, that do what we can to take care of living things. God is the God of living, And then you can go down through each of these commandments, right? But flip them. Apply the opposite side of the command, and then you're more at the kind of obedience that God is looking for. And to me, that's really cool. Each one of those, if you apply the reversing the command, the opposite approach, and you look at it, there's a whole new realm attached to each of these commands that I think God is looking for us. So, almost out of time, got to move on. And somebody made this comment, I really like it. Doc Smith said this: if you simply refrain from doing bad, you are no better than a corpse or a brick. I think he has a point there. You know what? Just not doing bad stuff, bricks do that, and so do dead bodies. God wants more than just that. He wants something better. Well, what is that? Well, look at the opposite. Preserve life. Do the others. So, sign of the covenant. This was given to Abraham. Genesis chapter 17. Somebody's got that, verses 10 through 14. Thanks. I may cut you off early. Just start reading it.
This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you. The covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision, and it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household, or bought with money from a foreigner. Those who are...
Okay, that's good. Thank you. On the 8th day, every male was supposed to be circumcised. Now, interesting note that Doc Smith points out in his book, that only after the 2nd day did the infant develop a proper clotting agent to take care of the bleeding that would happen. So something medical that God knew that maybe nobody else did at that time. So it makes sense. And also at that day, that's what this paper has. They also say that, I guess, infants can't feel pain nearly as much at that young age than you can when you're older. So that's what this whole circumcision thing is on that. But in the New Testament, in Colossians 2, I won't have you read it, but the sign of the covenant in the Old Testament was circumcision. The people who are going to be part of that were circumcised. And in the New Testament, what is the sign of the covenant? Colossians chapter 2 likens circumcision to what? Remember? To baptism. It is when you are baptized. It pictures that as circumcision. Now, some people want to latch onto this, and remember, I don't want to push analogies too far, but I will challenge you to think about this. If someone was not circumcised under the old covenant, do you remember what the punishment was? It wasn't death or anything, but it was banishment. You are no longer a part of our people. You are not part of God's people anymore. You're kicked out because you refuse to be circumcised. So let me ask you this. If baptism under the new covenant is pictured with the analogy of circumcision, What does that mean if you refuse to be baptized?
We were banished from heaven.
We don't want to, I don't want to push the analogy too far and make the Bible say something that it doesn't say, but do you see the startling implication there of that? Just something to think about. All right, let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Thank you for helping us learn more about you. Thank you that we're under the new covenant and how wonderful that is. Help us to, this week, I guess I just pray that we would see not just the negatives that you have for us, but start looking at the aim of the kind of holiness that you want us to have as Christians, and kind of aiming for that character. Please help us to see the other side of these negatives, and it's in Jesus' name I pray.
Amen. How did people prove they were circumcised? I mean, was there somebody that was the checker, the circumcision checker?
I think